Hi, Scott.
Hi, Darren.
It's good to have you here as we talk about a book that I think both of us enjoyed, though for not different reasons, for unusual reasons, because it's a book that's not really written for me and not really written for you. And so I asked you to come on and do a bit of a review of this book. I'm going to hold it up, and I think it means that it'll all be backwards, and hopefully Michael will put a very good picture of it on the screen. But it is 7 Reasons to Consider or Reconsider Christianity by Ben Shaw. And I thought one of the first questions I'd ask you, Scott, is that you knew Ben for a long time, and the book has been described as a very personal book. But as you read it, there's some things about it that are very compelling and really make you think. And I was just wanting to see if you can give us an idea of what really attracted you to the book and things that you got out of it that are really useful.
Sure. Well, I think that we all have friends who are much better explaining things to other people than we are, and I think Ben fits into that category. And so I really liked the book from the point of view it felt like a conversation,
Yeah.
and in particular it felt like a conversation with somebody who really needs to hear why is it even worthwhile bothering looking at Christianity. So it wasn't primarily a book written for you or for me. It was primarily written for people who either haven't thought about the question as to why is it worthwhile thinking about Christianity, or if they have thought about it, maybe that was a long time ago, hence the name of the cover on the cover is about reconsidering. So I think it's a good book because it invites people, not like necessarily you and I, who are already convinced of that it's worthwhile looking at the Christian faith, taking on board the person of Jesus and inviting him into our lives. It's talking from way back earlier than that. So this is an extremely useful book for somebody or to give to people who are either not yet considering or who are open to maybe have discussed with you the possibility of thinking, why is this Christian thing a thing for you? But you haven't found it easy to explain why that is. Or to even get to that point. This book really does, I think, some great foundation work for you.
Yeah. It was interesting, as even today I read about a woman from Western Sydney University who's a history professor there, was converted from a Peter Singer lecture and her time at Oxford University doing a PhD because what she realised was her atheist worldview didn't match her values that she held dearly. And it was only listening to someone explain her values as an atheist that made her think. And I think that's where Ben's book really hits a mark. It's not necessarily aimed at the university professor, but at the person, just the ordinary person in the pew or on the street who has these nagging questions.
Yeah, look, it's not a how-to. It's not an instructional how-to book for Christians. So this is definitely designed to be given away. So this is designed for you to buy. In other words, the main reason, if you'd ask me why would you bother reading this book as somebody at LCM, if you were somebody who's sure of your faith, who's committed your life to Jesus and has no concerns about whether or not you are a Christian, why would you buy this book? And the answer would be you'd buy this book so you'd know what it is you're giving to your friend.
Yeah.
And the primary, I think the primary thing about this is it's written by somebody who has a lot of experience in talking to people who are not yet Christians and who are outside, who are not sitting on the pews. He spent his life from very early stage. He had a real passion for communicating the gospel to people who did not know Jesus. And so it's not written from the point of view of a whole bunch of how-tos
Yeah.
or even the what, the content of the Christian faith. The kernel of it is there. The central messages of what the Christian faith are there. But he's primarily, I think, concerned with the idea of, well, why would you bother looking?
Yeah.
Why would you bother considering the Christian faith? What has it got to offer? So he starts at the logical place, which is to say, well, what are the big questions in life?
Yeah.
And is it worth thinking about those things? And I think that a lot of people would join with him in the early stages of the book and going, yeah, it is worth thinking about the big questions of life. And then he takes us from there to the idea that there is intellectual foundation. There is you don't have to check your brain at the door to consider what Christianity has to say about those big questions.
Yeah.
And he then takes us further to say, well, what Christianity has to say about those questions is not only well-founded and based on sound intellectual and historical basis, but actually what it's got to say is very attractive.
Yeah. And he says it so simply and clearly. That's what
Yeah.
I appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, you and I both know that Ben was a musician, very accomplished musician. At least he became one. I don't think he actually knew how to play a guitar very well, but when he first started off with his first band, but he became a very accomplished musician, and so it's fairly natural for him. He reaches for what I think is a fantastic analogy when it comes to the question of whether or not Christianity has anything attractive to say about the big questions in life. And his analogy is that it's the idea of a mondrian, the idea that we all know songs which we've misheard the lyrics. We hum along to the song and we sing the lyrics, but it's not actually the lyric that the writer wrote. It's what we think we heard. And Ben has a great analogy in this book that for so many people, they think they've heard the lyrics of Christianity, but they've actually misheard them. And there are a bunch of reasons why. And sometimes, to our shame, it's that the singers have got, have not really sung the song well. That's us. But sometimes too, it's about the ear of the listener. It's about the distractions. It's about all sorts of things. And he sets about to say, no, actually, Christianity does have very attractive things that are worthwhile listening to and hearing properly and taking an adult approach to and coming to them with adult eyes and perhaps reconsidering and rehearing what it is the Christian message has to say.
Yeah, because he does say the evidence is there, doesn't he?
Oh yes, he's not afraid to. In fact, he emphasizes the point that Christianity, in a sense, sets itself up for scrutiny, and that it bears scrutiny well. Ben was somebody who looked into the evidence himself. He's good friends with eminent historians, both secular and people who have come to views in terms of Christianity that say that this is worthwhile accepting. You and I have talked about it before, but I love the definition of faith, which is that faith is the assurance of the heart in the sufficiency of the evidence. Yeah. And Ben gives enough evidence in here to say these are the reasons why he, and by the way, I say that I believe that this evidence is sufficient to convince me that the person of Jesus it was real, historical, which by the way, as he says, is a barely disputed historical fact. But to then take it a step further and say, well, what were the claims that this incredibly influential man made? What did he claim about himself? What did his followers claim about him as well? The same followers who went to their deaths maintaining those claims. What did they have to say? What did they honestly believe? Whether or not it was true, what did they honestly believe? And where does that evidence point you? And I think that he's very winsome in the way that he sets these things out. He knows that many of his friends and many of his readers will not necessarily come to the same conclusion on the evidence, but he does want you and I to have a careful look at that evidence and look at it with an open mind.
Yeah. And that's the story he tells. I don't know if he was writing the book or writing a talk in the pub at that time, which is a great story.
Yeah. He told it. He told it at the book launch here in Sydney, not that long ago, and he said he was preparing whether it was the material that eventually became this book or this book itself. He was preparing it in a pub. He saw a group of young people come in, men and women come into the pub, and he thought, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, and he walked over to them and explained to them that he was there writing in the pub, writing up some notes for this discussion on people considering Christianity. And he said, he asked them, first of all, I think what it was they had been doing, and they were apparently police trainees, and they'd just been looking at a course in terms of evidence and assessing evidence. And so he asked them, he said, what do you think about Christianity? And one of them said, oh, I don't think there's enough evidence for the Christian faith. And Ben, quick as a flash, came back and said, asked him, have you read the Bible? Have you looked at what the primary evidence is for what Christian claims are? And rather sheepishly, he had to admit, no, he hadn't. So it was an interesting point in terms of taking an adult and sensible look at the evidence before we throw it out, or think that we've thrown it out.
That's right, and that's I think one of the strengths of the book is it says with that song idea, the song lyric idea, and also the evidence. I don't think you've either heard the right tune, or you've examined the evidence properly, and let me encourage you to do that. And he does it not in a way to say you're an idiot for not doing that, but look, it's there. Let's have a look, and I encourage you to go and have a look.
And look, I think, to be fair, he may not. I didn't get the sense so much that he was saying you haven't, but rather he asked the question, have you?
Have you?
And allows for the possibility that you may not have looked at this recently, or you may not have considered it, or you may say, yes, those things that you say are a mishearing of the Christian message are what I have believed. So maybe it's worth going back and having another look at it. I think that, there are things in this book which are not going to appeal to some people, particularly Ben uses a few references to Bono and U2, because that's inevitable, because, the band that he was a member of sounded at various times very U2 clonish. And I know a lot of people don't necessarily like Bono and U2, but I'm sorry, Darren, there are such people. But
I haven't met them.
if you can look past the U2 references, I think that this is a book that, as I say, is challenging but not offensive. I think that Ben is somebody who's had a lot of practice in talking to people in pubs and other places about what they believe. Because this book invites you, while you're reading it, I think, to be thinking about, what do I believe?
Yeah.
Having said that it's not a book primarily for Christians, I have to say, by the time I was about 3/4 of the way through it, I was thinking, boy, there are some things in here that have been put in ways I just haven't thought about them before. So there were some, I'm not going to spoil those bits, but have a look for where he uses the parable of the prodigal son. I thought that was a brilliant use of that passage, and it gave me, I think, an insight and a greater sense of the depth of the problem that Jesus came to address, and the generosity of God in how he goes about dealing with me and with you and with the problem that each of us faces.
Yeah. Final question, Scott. We've kind of said it's not for Christians necessarily, but Ben says that he had to reconsider the claims of Christ himself. Do you want to give us a little bit of background about that?
Well,
Without
this
spoiling the end.
no, sure. Well, but look, I think that it would be strange not to
Yeah.
talk about that in the context. So, um, Ben, I've known Ben for a long time. I knew him a long time ago. I haven't been close friends. I've been Facebook friends with him for a long time, as long as Facebook's been around, I guess, or some part of that. But I knew Ben back in the late 80s and early 90s when he was a band member. He was the lead guitarist of In the Silence, which was a Christian rock band, and had the privilege of being the honorary solicitor for that band. And they had recording contracts and various other things, and they were really, as far as I'm aware, they were the first Christian band to be Australian Christian band to be signed by Word Music, and they hit a point where they decided not to go further with that because the passion of the band as a unit and certainly individuals within the band, including Ben, was that they wanted to share the gospel with people, and they decided that actually they were better. God was leading them into doing that, not as the band, but as individuals. Yeah. And that band has gone on. The band members on that of that group have gone on to do amazing things and to be incredible witness and ministry. So Ben went over to the UK eventually. He went to Moore College, became a minister, went to the UK, and has been ministering in the UK for quite some time. So I haven't seen Ben for several decades. But Ben came very much back onto the radar for me when I heard that he had been diagnosed with cancer. It was a very aggressive kind of cancer. And Ben was writing this book when he knew of that diagnosis. So, as you say, he says in the book that he did carefully reconsider his Christian faith in the midst of all of this. Was what he was writing true? Would his words towards the end of his life be the same as those through the decades of his life journey? And he says, well, having looked at those things carefully and reconsidered them carefully and considered what is his legacy going to be, he was firmly convinced that this was the message that he wanted to be, in a sense, his last words. And without being overly dramatic, they are his last words, because some few weeks after his book launch, which I'm pleased to say I shared a hand of friendship with him, sadly Ben passed away a few weeks later. There's an inscription in my copy of the book. I was fortunate to buy one of the inscribed ones, but it's suitably anonymous, because Ben said to us at that book launch he didn't want those of us who bought it that night to hang on to it. What he wanted us to do was to lend it and to give it away. Yeah. And so Ben's inscription is not just to me, but it's to whoever reads this book. And you can see I've put flags all over it, but I have not scribbled in it. So one person in our congregation has already reserved this book as the first loan, and I will honour that. But I know that you've got a copy already, Darren, so people can borrow that off you.
They can.
And I'm sure that you will be able to find copies online. It's not very long.
That's right.
You can read this easily in a weekend. In fact, I think you could read it in a shorter period than that. But given COVID and the time that we have to read things, I encourage people to buy it, to read it, and then do what Ben said he wanted people to do with it. And that is to give it away to their friends and family, or lend it, get it back, and lend it out again.
Yeah. That's great. And I'll agree to lend my copy and even give it away if somebody really has somebody they want to read it after they've read it from church, then that'll be fine. Thanks, Scott. Final words?
Well, I think that this is, as I say, a suitable legacy for a man of God who spent his life consistently doing what, as a teenager, he came to believe God wanted him to do, which was to share the gospel, to minister to people, and to preach. And the wonderful thing is, through this book and others that he's written, he's still preaching.
Yeah, fantastic. We'll leave it there. Thanks, Scott.